I'm excited to present to you Osteal Therapeutics. We are a developer of antimicrobial therapeutics for orthopedic infections. And we focus on drug-device combinations. And fundamentally, what we are treating is the problem of biofilm infection. So biofilms, for those who aren't familiar, are these polymicrobial organisms that essentially you have multiple species of bacteria. They form a shell over themselves. It protects them from the immune system and from systemic drugs like systemic antibiotics. It makes these infections incredibly difficult to treat. The common theme that you see across these types of infections is these biofilms like to form on orthopedic implants. They form on foreign bodies. And that further isolates them because once they're sitting on the metal, the bloodstream they're disassociated from the bloodstream, which makes it even harder for the immune system and systemic antibiotics to get to them. So, these markets break down into basically three big segments. It's periprosthetic joint infection, so infected hip and knee implants, some shoulders and elbows, spine, and trauma, so fracture-related infection. For Osteal, our initial market that we're going after is periprosthetic joint infection. It's about a 45,000 patient market worth about $3 billion. And today there are no approved products to treat PJI. Part of the reason PJI matters, it's a killer. So it's got a 5-year survival rate lower than breast cancer. In absolute numbers, 1 in 5 of these patients are going to be dead at the end of 5 years. The outcomes for these patients are bad, but they're also really bad for the healthcare system. They're incredibly expensive to treat, over $190,000 a year on average, for your typical PJI in direct healthcare spending. And in overall costs, it's well over $500,000. And those numbers are actually a little old with inflation. That's probably more like $700,000. The real issue in terms of treating these infections is that the current standard of care just doesn't work very well. So a patient in the US who's getting the gold standard therapy for PJI is going to get what's called a 2-stage exchange arthroplasty. They're going to come in for a stage 1. They're going to get the infected prosthesis removed. They're going to have a radical debridement, and then a bone cement spacer is going to be placed. It's non-load bearing, so that patient is minimally ambulatory while they're being treated. They're discharged for 6 weeks of IV antibiotics, and if they're lucky, they come back after an average of 16 weeks to get a second stage procedure where the spacer's removed, they get debrided again, and then they get their final revision implant, and hopefully they now have their ambulatory status restored. The lucky ones, though, are the 16-week people who haven't walked in 16 weeks because half of the patients never get to stage 2. So this is a graph of 12,000 Medicare patients who had stage 1 procedures following them for 4 years. You can see half the knee patients and only 45% of the hip patients ever got stage 2 reimplantations. And if you don't get there by 12 months, you are not going to. So in response to that, Osteal has developed a new approach called cyclic local antibiotic irrigation, whereby during the stage 1 procedure, when the infected prosthesis is removed, we put in a titanium fenestrated spacer that's attached to an irrigation control unit and surrounded by foam dressings. What this allows us to do is directly administer 2 broad-spectrum antibiotics in concentrations 1,000 times higher than what's achievable with systemics. So we're able to overwhelm a biofilm infection with these high concentrations. What it also allows us to do is minimize systemic uptake, which is dangerous to the patient's kidneys and hearing. It'll actually, if you tried to go 1,000 times higher with systemics, those patients would have no kidneys and they'd be deaf. It is a drug-device combination. We sell the drugs, the spacers, the irrigation control unit, instruments and dressings, all single-use disposable products that allow a hospital to treat a patient not in 16 weeks, but in 7 days, and 100% of patients get their new revision prosthesis on day 7. So we take a 16-week therapy to 7 days and a 50% reimplantation rate to 100% reimplantation. We're late clinical stage. We've performed 2 RCTs. Apex and Apex 2 with endpoints at 180 days and 365, 180 being the primary. And what we're looking for is what we define as overall success. It's a composite endpoint of patient must survive the follow-up period, get reimplanted, have no further reoperation on the joint, no signs of infection, and they must be off antibiotics by those endpoints. You can see here in the combined data from the two studies at 180 days, we had a 41-point treatment effect over the standard of care. We will complete the final readout on Apex 2 next month, and then we will go ahead and move forward with submitting our NDA. Further, in the Apex trial results, we saw 50% lower mortality in the experimental arm, 100% reimplantation versus 87%. We reimplanted on average 108 days faster, saved the surgeon 60 minutes of OR time, and had no serious adverse events related to our drugs. FDA views this very favorably. We have every special designation that FDA can confer upon an anti-infective drug. So we are a breakthrough orphan drug, qualified infectious disease product, priority review, fast-track drug. They'll review our application in 6 months, therefore. But critically, because we're orphan and QIDP, we have 12 years of regulatory exclusivity at approval, whereby FDA will not approve the use of the drugs we're using for the treatment of PJI by any other manufacturer. We turn these generic antibiotics back into branded product. It's a highly concentrated and rapidly growing market. 50% of the cases are in 300 hospitals. 70% of the cases are in 500 hospitals in the US. There's one payer, 65% of cases are Medicare, and this is growing at the same rate as total joint arthroplasty, 6 to 7% annual CAGR. And that's because the infection rate hasn't changed in 25 years. So it's about 2%, and it's always been. We have very attractive economics, both for Osteal at a 90% plus gross margin, but also for the payers and providers and surgeons. The surgeons will bill the same codes they bill today and get paid what they get paid today, but save 60 minutes in the OR. Payers, we've done extensive work evaluating CMS's economics, and we found that we are able to provide CMS a break-even proposition with a massive improvement in outcomes. And the hospitals will also bill the exact same codes they bill today, but they'll also get a 75% NTAP that we automatically qualify for as a qualified infectious disease product. So we feel that we're well poised to become the standard of care in the space. We will be the first approved therapy for PJI in the United States. We don't expect anyone to be closer behind us than about 3 years. We think maybe even 5. We've got very strong clinical data, which is unusual in the orthopedic space to have randomized controlled trials. And we're well capitalized with investment from both Zimmer Biomet and Johnson & Johnson, who sit on our boards but have no strategic rights. Near-term milestones, we'll be submitting our NDA right at the beginning of next year, following the readout from our clinical trial in Q4. And we'll be raising our Series E financing to finance commercialization right about the time we expect to be approved in August of next year, with launch in Q4 of 25. So thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. You guys have a great meeting.